you're returning, welcome back. And if you're new to the RAD lectures, then welcome. In this video, which is actually the third video of my NeoVim with TMUX for web development and software development, we're going to be doing a deep dive into configuring TMUX to work with NeoVim to give us our full development environment. Now, TMUX is a terminal multiplexer. It's a command line tool, and it allows us to have multiple windows or multiple sessions within our terminal emulator window, and it is super helpful. You're going to see throughout this, we're going to be using plugins, we're going to be applying a theme, we're going to be setting key bindings, and even have a few scripts. Those scripts are for things like our own custom menu, and also we're going to be diving into a final few things on NeoVim, including debugging, Git integration, and this is going to really wrap everything together and summarize our NeoVim with TMUX web development environment. Now, everything is documented in my GitHub, okay? So you can always reference all of the code that I'm going to be taking you through line by line. It's all there, and you're welcome to raise an issue. You can even use it as a template for your own custom NeoVim configuration. All right, so enough with the formalities. Let's get into it. Yalla. If you are joining in this part of the series and you haven't done the previous two videos, that's totally fine. The most important thing is that you've got a custom NeoVim configuration. As you can see, if I print my working directory, right now I am in my config nvim. So whether you're using a custom NeoVim configuration that we've set up throughout this tutorial, or you're using something off the shelf like nvchad, it doesn't matter. This is about integrating TMUX. And just on that point, NeoVim, of course, does have its own built-in terminal, and there's nothing wrong with using the built-in terminal. I guess you could say there's pros and cons. In some cases, it's more convenient to use the NeoVim terminal. In other cases, people might prefer, as I do in larger code bases, to have a dedicated terminal multiplexer like TMUX that allows you to have other terminal sessions. I'm going to leave a tag to my video on a plugin-less NeoVim configuration. In that video, we implemented floating terminals, and so there's nothing wrong with that approach. With time, only you will know what works best for you. With all that being said, let's just do a quick review. I've got my NeoVim configuration. We've set this NeoVim configuration up. We've got these plugins, and we've got our config and options and Keymaps native, and we've set a bunch of language servers up. And so now what we need to do is we need to install TMUX. And of course, as always, I will link everything to the video. Okay. And I'll show you how to install it for other operating systems like Mac and Arch and Ubuntu. I'm going to install it. Okay, and so we can have a look at TMUX. So here we can see that the version of TMUX that we're on is 3.5a, and that corresponds here to the stable version on the GitHub. You don't necessarily have to have the absolute most up-to-date version for this tutorial. We're not doing too much customization. However, this is important that you've got at least version 3 or 3.2. All right, so now that it's installed, let's just configure a few quality of life items that I set, just so it makes it a little bit easier to use. And so what we're going to do, we're going to step back one, and now as you can see, we are in the config directory. What we want to do is we want to make dir, and we're going to create a TMUX directory. And in here, we're going to change into the TMUX directory. And in here, we're going to create a new file. And it's going to be called tmux.conf. Okay, so now we've created the file. Let's go and we're going to just open that file. Of course, it's going to be empty. So now we need to start applying a few basic settings. We're going to get to plugins in a moment, but these are just a few of the keybinds that I use so that I can demonstrate. And this is the first thing that we want to do. So the first thing, we want to set some basic colors for the terminal. This is going to help out later. And then the prefix key. So ordinarily it is going to be Control B. You can see here this capital C-B that we're unbinding, and I'm going to have it as Control A. It's just a little bit easier, but basically much like the leader key in NeoVim, we need a prefix, what's referred to as a prefix. You can think about it as the leader. We need to do that first. We hit that first before hitting any of the shortcuts that I'm going to take you through, or any of the keybinds. All right. So what this does is it just says we're going to bind Control A to our TMUX prefix. Okay, that actually conflicts with one thing in NeoVim, which is to increment a number. I don't bother too much with that, but you set a prefix that you would like. Now, I'm going to set new windows with C, and we're going to put them in the current directory path. So that's what this one here does. And then next, what I'm going to do is we're going to say, because the default is, if you wanted to say split the window vertically, then you would use the prefix key and the percentage sign. If you wanted to split it horizontally, you'd use prefix and then the double quote. That doesn't really make much sense to me. I prefer to have prefix and then the pipe symbol, or prefix and the dash symbol. So I set those, and then we are going to have our TMUX config. I'm going to send a message when we reload our config. So if we just move this over a little bit, whenever we want to refresh our TMUX configuration, we want to say prefix and then R. So in our case, Control A and then R. That's going to reload the config, and all this does here is it uses this display message API here. So this display message API, it's just a handy trick in TMUX. You can actually send message events. And so all I'm doing here is just saying, okay, the config has been reloaded. I'm doing that because throughout the tutorial, we're going to reload the config a few times. Now I've got some handy ones here where we want to resize the window. So for example, we're going to say prefix and then J, K, L, H, and M. All right, for maximize, that last one is, or minimize, toggling it basically. So this is for resizing panes. I'm going to set it so the mouse is on, although we rarely need to use it. We're going to have some scroll back on the history. Now we're going to have some Vim keys and motions, and especially around copy mode, mouse dragging. I'm going to put the status line, because we've got our NeoVim Lua line down here. I'm going to put the TMUX on top. Okay, and for the moment that's enough. Okay, so now what I'm going to do, I'm going to write and close, and I'm going to create TMUX, and I'm going to say new session. Okay, and this is going to create a new TMUX session. Now, don't be turned off by the ugliness of everything here. We're going to obviously make it look a lot nicer, but let's just demonstrate. So there's a few things that I want to show you. One of these, for example, is I'm going to split the window. So I'm going to say Command A and then dash. All right, so that is going to create a horizontal split. And if we wanted to exit that, we can say Control A and then X. It's going to ask us, do you want to kill pane 1? I'm going to hit Y, and we could do it again with Control A and then the pipe symbol. That's going to create these two. Now, if we want to move between them, the default keybinds are Control A and then this curly brace and Control A curly brace, but you'll notice that you can't just use HJKL to move around here. That's a bit annoying. We're going to add a plugin in a moment so that we can see that. Now, let's just demonstrate a few more things. If I say Control A and then W, it's going to show all of the windows and panes. So we'll be using that extensively. Actually, we're going to even customize this so it looks a little bit nicer. Now, we can actually move panes. So let's say if I say Control A Q, it's going to show the numbers here. And in fact, what I can do is say Control A and T, it's going to show the time. Now, if I say Control A or prefix and then squiggly bracket, I'm actually moving the pane from one side to the other, okay? But what about if I just want to focus on the other one? Well, what I can say is Control A and then O. That means I'm going to focus on the other. You can see my cursor's here, and if I do it again, I'm going to be back on this one. So if I hit Q, I'm there and my focus is there. We can also cycle through our layouts, okay? So if we say prefix and space, we can actually see that it changes into these different layouts. Okay, and finally, one of the handy ones is we're going to say Control A or prefix and then Z, and that actually zooms it. So if you see up here, I'm in Z, you can see there's a capital Z. If I do that again, it's going to say Z. If I say Control A O and I say Control A Z, then here we're now expanding that one. Okay, so these are some of the basic shortcuts. Now what we want to do is we actually want to add some plugins. Just like in NeoVim, we want to make things a little easier. If we want to kill a pane, we can say Control A and X. It says kill the pane. I'm going to say no for the time being. The other thing would be if we wanted to, if we see here, we've actually got a window. We've got a window, which means this encapsulates or is a session or a whole number of panes. You can have any number of panes within inside a window. So I'm going to say Control A and then ampersand. And now I can say I'm going to kill that, and now our session is over, all right? So we're going to install TPM. And if we have a look here on the right-hand side, we can see that TPM just stands for the TMUX plugin manager. And the way that it works is we just want to put it into this directory, and we can use Git to do this, in fact. Now, it says that it only needs 1.9 or higher, so you should be fine irrespective of which distribution that you're on. Let's copy this and let's just have a look at the command that we're going to run. So we are going to be cloning this TMUX plugins TPM. This is the repository here, and we're going to be putting it in our home directory at TMUX plugins TPM. Okay, so you can customize it to put it somewhere else, but I think for the time being that is fine. Let's do that. So just so that we're all on the same page, let's change into our home directory. We can do cd tilde, and then in here we can say ls.tmux, and in here we can see that we've got plugins, and this is where the plugins are going to be installed. Okay. All right, let's go back to where we were with cd and then dash. That's going to take us back to the tmux directory. And now what we want to do is we want to set a bunch of these tmux plugins. Okay. So let's go and edit our tmuxconf, and I'm going to put this in the center of the screen. Out of the box, it's going to tell us about 2. We can copy this. We definitely need the top one, which is TPM itself. And so we need to tell TMUX where to look for the TMUX plugin manager. So at the end of our file, we just want to have this. Now, if you choose a different location, then you could, of course, put it into here. Okay, now the first one that I'm going to point out is Vim TMUX Navigator, and this is probably the most critical straight off the bat. This one is just going to allow us to use Control-HJKL and then also backslash if we want the previous split. Let's go, and we've got to also add this into our vimrc file, all right? But first, before we do that, let's set it here. I'm going to set this plugin. Just so that we're on the same page, we're going to add this TPM, which is our TMUX plugin manager, and then we're also going to be adding TMUX Sensible. That's just a set of very basic configurations that a lot of people agree on. So finally, we're going to be setting this Vim TMUX Navigator. However, just before we do that, we need to make sure that we also put it in our NeoVim configuration. Okay, so if we go to this repository, Vim TMUX Navigator, we can see that this is the URL, and we need to ensure that we've got this here. So we've got the ability to navigate, and here they've already built these shortcuts for us. All right, let's go and do that. We're going to write and quit this. I'm going to step back 1 and go to NVim, and in here I'm going to open Vim. Let's open our tree, and in here we've got our plugins. So even if you're not on my custom configuration, you should have a similar kind of setup. We want to add a file with A, and here I'm going to call it Vim TMUX Navigator. And of course, that's a Lua file. Here we've got this file, and what I'm going to do, I'm going to copy this and I'm going to put this in here. However, just make sure that you return this table. Now we've got that, so I'm just going to write and close everything, and we're going to open up Vim, and it's going to install the Vim TMUX Navigator. So now what we need to do is we need to actually open TMUX, because right now we're not even in TMUX, right? So the way that we can do that, we're going to create a new session. And so I'm going to say TMUX new session. It's going to create this new session. Now we went through some shortcuts before, but what I'm going to do, I'm going to show you some more. So we've got prefix $, and we're going to call this our main session. That's how you would call it. And then here, what I would ordinarily do is I would say prefix and comma, and I'm going to call this nvim. So if we go to our window, we can see we've got a main and we've got nvim in there. So if I said prefix C, now what I'm going to do is I'm in a new window. Okay, I'm going to go back and I'm going to cd into TMUX, and I'm going to rename this one with prefix and then comma, and I'm going to call this TMUX. Okay, so now what we can do, if we say leader W, we can see that we've got a main session. Okay, it's got 2 windows in it, and any of those can have any number of panes. All right, so session is this one, and then we've got 0 is nvim and 1 is TMUX. Great. If we want, we can actually quickly move through these with prefix N, and that'll switch us around. So prefix N or prefix P, that's next or previous if we wanted to just quickly move through them. Or of course, say right now I'm in nvim, I could say prefix and then 1, that would take me to TMUX. So these are just a few navigation tricks and tips, all right? Let's say we wanted to open, I'm going to go back to 0. We're in the NeoVim one, and here I'm going to open up in NeoVim. Now down the bottom, I'm going to create another pane. And so, okay, so at the moment, if we wanted to move between these two, we actually moved out of NeoVim, but now we're stuck in this one down here, right? So I'm going to say Control A, O, and that takes us up the top. And because we've got the plugin installed in NeoVim, we can actually get back to the other one. But if we press Control K, which is up, we're not able to move back to our NeoVim. What we need to do is run prefix and then Shift I. So first reload our config with prefix R and then prefix Shift I. And what we're doing now is it's installing, right? So now what you can see is you can actually move up and down. So our plugins are actually installed. All right, we're making some good progress. Now we're not actually done yet. What we want to do is go back to TMUX. Now I'm here in TMUX, and what I want to do is I want to add some more plugins, okay? And so I'm going to open up that TMUX conf, and in here we're going to add some additional plugins. Okay, so the first one that I want to add is called TMUX Resurrect, and as you can see here, what it does is it persists TMUX environments across system restarts. That means that once you come back or you reboot your system, all of your different panes and windows and sessions are going to be restored to where they were when you shut the system down. And that includes all the NeoVim files and every process which is in there. Okay, so the first one is the resurrect, TMUX resurrect, and then secondly, continuum, and they work together. TMUX continuum, so what it does is it just keeps saving the environment. We're going to set this to 15 minutes, and then when the system reboots, TMUX resurrect gets booted up, then it knows what to restore. So these two work in tandem. Finally, I'm just going to add this TMUX yank, which is for working with the system clipboard. I'll link this, of course. If you're interested, there's a whole bunch of other TMUX plugins. Now, I don't necessarily use these, but you've got things like batteries, you've got all kinds of different plugins available, list, all kinds of stuff. They're very, very obviously helpful. So if you are interested, go ahead and use that. Now, here what we need to do, because we've added these 3 plugins, right? What we're going to do, we're going to say prefix R to reload the config. And then what we're going to do is we're going to install all of these. Okay, and so this won't be totally apparent, but once you have been working on TMUX for a little while and you've got your projects and everything, the next time you restart your machine, it's going to resurrect everything at the last save state, okay? So here what I'm going to do next is I'm just going to set some settings around the resurrect and continuum. So we want to set the resurrect capture pane contents. That means that each of the individual panes, as I mentioned a moment ago, if you were in, for example, a NeoVim file, you want to capture that, and when we resurrect everything, you want that NeoVim file to be updated again. And we want continuum restore on so that everything would be restored. Now the save interval, I said at the moment I had 15 minutes. Let's just do 1 minute. And of course, we're going to have to reload our config. And then finally, what we want to do is we want to make sure that we have a theme, because as you can see, everything here is pretty bad. And if you refer to this repository, which I'm going to link, we've got a bunch of awesome, it's called Awesome TMUX, and it has a bunch of not only plugins, but it also has a bunch of stuff around theming and that kind of thing. Now, I personally don't use this. I just like to leave this here because you may want to grab some additional plugins, or you might want to grab one of these themes. Now, the theme that I use is actually custom. I created it myself. It's based on the melange color scheme of my NeoVim configuration, and it's nice and simple, so I like to use that. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to save this file, and then I'm going to reload it. And now you can see that I've applied my color scheme, and it's pretty simple. It's just got the earthy tones of my NeoVim configuration. It kind of matches up. But if you want something pre-built out of the box, you can of course copy mine if you want, or you can use some of these. For example, if you wanted Capuchin, then you could come in here and you could simply clone the repository here to the plugins Capuchin, and then you could apply this theme. Okay. So our TMUX configuration has these plugins above, and it also has a basic theme. All right, depending on what you've chosen to go with. Now, it's looking pretty good. The thing is that now what I'm going to do is just play around with TMUX and show you some custom configurations that I use on TMUX, all right? So going to close this. So recall a moment ago, we've got prefix W. It gives us this kind of menu, right? We can see all the windows, and we can see that this main session has 2 windows, and we can then click on this, all right? Well, I can navigate up and down with J and K, fine. However, what I like to do is I like to have a custom menu that kind of pops up in the middle, and we can achieve that using an API in TMUX called the TMUX pop-ups, okay? So I'm going to go here to one, we're in the TMUX, and I'm going to write and close, just make sure that you don't lose anything that you've been working on. And in here, I'm actually going to make a directory, we're going to call it scripts. And scripts, what we're going to do is we're going to change in there, and I'm going to create a new file. It's going to be called TMUX and then menu, and it's a shell script, okay? Now we need to make this shell script executable. So we're going to say chmod +x for executable, and we'll make it executable like that. Now let's go and we're going to edit the file, okay? And so the script looks like this, and I'll just kind of explain it to you. Basically, what we want to do is, rather than using the built-in session viewer, we're going to list all the sessions, okay? And we're going to remove all of those with a pop-up prefix, so that if the name starts with this underscore pop-up, we're going to remove it. And then we're going to put it in a list, and we're going to also list the windows. And then we're going to have a certain format here, okay, of the window and then the session, and it's going to have some information. Now it's going to use this icon for the session, okay, and then this one, the window, is going to be broken down by these circular icons, and all this does is it just applies that. It uses FZF, so you got to make sure that you've got FZF installed. You should have it installed if you've been doing this tutorial series. And then once we're done, we can just select the one that we want, and it's going to take it to us. Okay, so that's what the script does. Now, I'm going to just write and close this, and we're going to step back, and I'm going to say vim tmux conf. Okay, and here what I'm going to do, I'm just going to add these few lines. So we're going to have a session list, all right? And so we're going to use prefix W. We're actually going to be overriding the original one, the original prefix, Control A W. We're now going to have our TMUX menu, and that's going to come up. It's going to have a width of 30% and a height of 50% of the screen, okay? So let's demo this. I'm going to reload, okay? We of course don't need to reinstall because this is our own script. Now I'm going to say Control A W, and we can see that rather than the one that we had earlier, we've actually got this kind of nice little menu in the center of the screen. Now, if I say I had a lot of stuff open, I could open it, I could write TMUX and then quickly go to TMUX, or I could say NVim and it would quickly take me to NVim, or I could navigate using Control J, K, and L. So that's the first pop-up that I like to have. And of course, there's a lot that you can really do with this. Let's close out, and I'm going to go back into our script, and I'm going to create another one. This is the second script, and it's actually the last script. This is going to be the last custom script that we're going to use. And we're going to say touch TMUX and then scratch. Irrespective of which session I'm in, I want to just be able to quickly go to a terminal. You can imagine if you just wanted to update your system or install some system-wide package or whatever, or you just wanted to have a singular place that you could always access, and it'll make sense in a moment. So here what I'm going to do is I'm going to say vim tmux scratch. Once again, we need the shebang. We had that in the other one, and I'm going to call this one Popup scratchpad, okay? And then in here, the reason that I've prefixed this, if you recall earlier in our windows, we don't want our scratchpad popping up in our menu, but we do want it to be persistent, all right? And then what we're going to do, we're going to say, if there's no present TMUX session with the Popup scratchpad name, we're going to create it, okay? And it's got a few options that we're going to have here, and then we're going to set the session ID, and finally we're going to attach. So this only gets executed if we haven't actually set up this scratchpad yet. All right, let's write and close this. I'm going to chmod +x and then tmux scratch. Of course, just like before, we need to go back to our main tmux conf. Now here we've got a few setup items for the scratchpad, all right? And so we're going to see in a moment that we need Control T. Control T needs to display the pop-up. That's how we're going to actually activate it, all right? And we don't want tab working here because we want to unbind it, because I use tab for auto-completion with ZSH. We're not doing ZSH in this, but you can imagine previously every time we hit tab, it was going to exit. So I've unbound that. Now what we want to do is we want to also say T and Q, which we're exiting as well. I'm binding those to just send the T and Q key. Control T, it not only attaches, it also detaches, and then we've got copy mode, all right? So once again, let's reload with prefix R, all right? And so what I can do now is I can say here, and now I'm in this directory. So you can imagine if I wanted, I could say sudo. Now I'm not going to actually update my system. Okay, and now if I put it away with Control T, you can see that it is persistent. So it doesn't matter which one I'm in. Okay, and so I just wanted to show you something on the right hand side. This is the TMUX cheatsheet.com. I'll link this, of course. And so I want to, just to demonstrate everything that we're doing here, I want to create a new session. So if we go here at the moment, we've got just the one main session, right? What if we wanted to create another session? Well, we can actually also, just like in NeoVim, there is a command mode. If I say prefix and then command, here we can see 2 colons up the top. And if I say new, it's going to create a new session. I can, of course, as we saw before, rename this. We're going to call it other session. And in here, what we're going to see, if I go back here, we've actually now got 2 sessions. One of these contains 2 windows, and then the other one just contains the 1. Okay. What about though if I go to the other session and then I open up this? Well, it's the same terminal. So that scratchpad is just persistent across all of my sessions. Okay, so just switching context for a moment, we're definitely still working on TMUX. There's one last thing that I really wanted to show you. However, when we set up our NeoVim configuration, there were 2 plugins that I actually skipped over. I wanted to leave to the end, and that was around our Git configuration or integrating Git into NeoVim. But if we're doing any kind of development, we need a version control system. And the 2 really great plugins here are gitsigns, and gitsigns gives you signs in your gutter, and then vim-fugitive, which is a wrapper for all of our Git commands. Now, there is more that gitsigns does than that, but I tend to just use it for that. You can also jump to different hunks and that kind of thing. But what I want to do is I want to just demonstrate that, and then I'm going to show you in TMUX how I get some additional Git control or another tool that I like to use for Git. Okay, so here what I'm going to do, I'm actually going to say git init, and we're going to, it's created that, so we say ls/lah, so it's now a Git repository. All right, and so what I'm going to do, I'm going to first install, let's open up Vim, and I'm going to go to our plugins, and it looks like everything here is new, right? You can see all these stars and everything like that. But if we open a file, we don't actually get anything here in the gutter. It doesn't actually tell us anything. Of course, because we've been coding along and you've been doing a really good job, you don't even get warnings or any diagnostics. Of course, if we had an issue, we would, because we've set that up. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to add in gitsigns nvim-dap-ui, and okay, so just install it. We're just going to obviously use the GitHub short URL, and then we're going to save that. And then next, I'm just going to quickly install vim-fugitive. So I'm going to add another file. We're going to call this one vim-fugitive. And just make sure that you're returning the table. Okay, so we've got these 2 now. I'm going to restart my NeoVim configuration. It's going to install those. Okay, so we've installed gitsigns and we've installed vim-fugitive. So, and then what I've done is I've gone and said git add, and I'll add everything. Now, if we're just using git commands here, right? So git status is going to show us, okay, these are all the files that are to be committed. It's everything. And then I can say run git commit. I can pass the flag and say sure initial commit. Okay, and so if we open up the tree, now we're going to see that everything is fine. But okay, but now what happens if I say edit? Well, you can see here that we've got all of these git signs. Now, what I could do is I can go and say git blame. You can also just use capital G, and you can see that, okay, this was myself. I committed this just during this video a moment ago, and now we've got these new additions. So blame works in that respect. And if we wanted to say git signs, they also have next hunk. We can see here, and we can say git signs, and we can have a look at additional stuff here. Like we can say preview hunk, and it can tell us that, okay, we've just created all these new lines. So these are really, really powerful tools, and definitely they need to be embedded into your workflow if it comes to Git. I'm just demonstrating some of them. Of course, everything is really well documented. Okay, and so that is how gitsigns and also vim-fugitive work, and they're extremely powerful plugins. You definitely need to have them if you're going to be on any kind of serious project for your version control. And the next thing that I want to show you, just changing context a little bit here, is I want to show you Lazygit. So Lazygit is as it says here, a simple terminal UI for Git commands. So just to be absolutely clear, we're not going to be installing this in NeoVim. We're going to be installing this on our system as a command line tool. Okay, a terminal user interface, and we're going to be having a keybind with TMUX to load it. So this course is all about how we use NeoVim and TMUX. And so I've showed you just now how we're going to use Git in the context of NeoVim. Now I'm going to show you how I use the Lazygit terminal tool in the context of TMUX and in our terminal. Okay, so we can obviously see this is an this has got to be one of the most popular packages that I'm aware of with 64,000 stars. And if we come down here, we can see there's great documentation. And one of the documentation items is installation. So we can come here, we see installation. So of course, if you're on Mac, you can use brew install Lazygit. If you are on Arch, then you can simply use pacman. Now, what I need to do is, because I'm on a Fedora system, then I'm going to use this command here. One thing I just want to quickly point out, because the other operating system that I've been showing this whole time has been Ubuntu. This is the command down here. All right, so let's open our scratchpad and I'm going to run these commands. Okay, and so I've installed that. Now I'm just going to close this for the time being. Okay, and I'm going to exit out of this and I'm going to go back to my TMUX session. So TMUX. Okay, and down here, I'm going to put in the commands that I use for Lazygit. So with Lazygit, we actually don't need our own designated script. Just put this in the center for you. What we're going to do is we're going to create a new pop-up, and it's going to be a bit bigger, about 80%, because I want a lot of the screen for Lazygit. And then I'm going to load Lazygit. So this is obviously the executable. Now let's reload our config. Okay, and so the binding is going to be prefix G. All right, so let's switch back to our NeoVim repository. We know that NeoVim here is a Git repository. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to run prefix G, and it's going to open up the branches. Obviously, this is a super simple repository, but you can see the commits and so forth. And so that summarizes this section when it comes to TMUX, but also how can we integrate Git and have a good Git workflow. Now, in the next section, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be adding in Rust. Now, that's the only language that I use that I didn't include in the others, and there's a reason for that. I'm going to demonstrate, and we're going to be demonstrating debugging. Okay, team, if you have come this far, then congratulations. You are well on your way to having an excellent NeoVim and TMUX configuration for your development environment. In this final section, I want to introduce debugging. Now, debugging is a very important skill, of course, and it's one that I tend to focus on lower level languages. So rarely do I use a debugger with TypeScript or interpreted languages, whereas with things like Golang and Rust, I tend to use the debugger, mainly because it's more difficult with compiled code. Now, Rust is a language with a huge amount of community support. It's one of the most popular languages, and it has a great tool set. So that's why I wanted to introduce it. And I also wanted to introduce it because the installation that I use is slightly different. Now, you can use LSP config, the same as we've done with all of our language servers down here, for example. And you can, of course, use EFM when it comes to the formatting. But the way that I'm going to do it is a little bit different. So we are going to be installing Rust Analyzer, and this is the language server for the Rust programming language. We're also going to be installing Code LLDB, which is going to be the debug adapter protocol. Now, it's for VS Code, but we're going to be using it in NeoVim. And we are going to be wrapping all the debugging together with nvim-dap-ui. But specifically when it comes to installing Rust, I'm going to be using Rustaceanvim or Rustaceanvim. Now, what it says here, this is actually a fork from an original repository, rusttools.nvim, and that was very popular. The point is that this does a lot of the heavy lifting for us. So rather than us setting up the languages in here, we're actually just going to include it in this file here, Rustaceanvim.lua. So that's where our configuration for Rust is going to go. So let's get started. Of course, the first thing that we need to do is we need to open NeoVim. And we've got two dependencies that we want to work with here. One is the Rust language server protocol, Rust Analyzer, which we saw just here. And the second one is Code LLDB. That's the debugger. So when it comes to linting and formatting, we're actually going to be using Clippy for the linting, and the formatting is going to be Rust format, but we're actually going to install those using Rustup. So the general setup is quite a bit different when it comes to Rust here, and that's why I put it in its separate section. And I think it's a great language to introduce debugging in NeoVim with, okay? So let's open Mason. We're still going to be using Mason for the Rust analyzer. So I've hit 2 there, and I'm going to search for Rust-analyzer, and I'm going to hit I. That's going to install the Rust analyzer. Now, if we go to our DApps, or debug adapter protocols, I'm now going to search for code LLDB. We can see that this one is for, or it supports and can be used with C, C++, Rust, and Zig. Okay, and so we're not actually going to be going to any of the linters. Just for reference, if you go to the formatters and you go to Rust FMT, then you'll see that it's actually deprecated. If we hit enter, we can see that it says Rust format should now be installed via Rustup. And that's what we're going to be doing. So it is distinct, and we're not going to be using EFM. We're going to be relying on the integration of Rust Analyzer, the LSP, to use the Rust formatting as well as Clippy for the linting, okay? Let's just make sure, if we go back here, we can see that we've got these 2 installed. These top 2, code LLDB and Rust Analyzer, are installed, all right? So the first thing that we're gonna do, we're gonna go over to our Rustaceanvim, and I'm going to close this here. I'm going to search for the file. Now I've already created the file. You just need to, if I hit Control G, you can see down here that I've got this file in Lua, plugins, and then Rustaceanvim.lua. So make sure that you've got an equivalent file. And of course, everything is documented in the GitHub, so you can go and refer to it. Let's have a look at what we've got here. So we're actually going to use the same onAttach function. However, if I go to the onAttach function, then we can see down here that we have some additional keymaps. So I'm going to be using the same onAttach function. It's going to have all the same keymaps as with the other clients. But when it comes to our Rust analyzer, our onAttach function is also going to be supporting debugging. And therefore, I've got a few keymaps here. So for example, I'm going to have dap continue and step over into out. So these are all just shortcuts. You can set the ones that you like. These are just the ones that I like. And I'll demonstrate these a little bit later, okay? The first thing is the onAttach function. And we're going to show in a moment where we pass that. The next one is the git code LLDB adapter, and this is a function, and what it's doing is it's actually looking at a Mason registry. It's querying Mason to say, is this installed? And if code LLDB is installed, so in our case it will be installed, then it's going to go and set it up, and depending on what the operating system is, so for example if we're on Linux, like I'm on Linux at the moment, it's going to have a suffix of .so. Otherwise, if it's on Mac, it's going to be dylib. So if you are on Mac or you're on Linux, you don't necessarily need this, but if you go between the two, it is helpful. So this is basically just grabbing and creating that path to the code LLDB so that it can be used in the Rustaceanvim configuration for the adapter. All right, so this is all to do with the debugging, that function just there. If you didn't want to include this, you could just omit this. If you're setting up Rust, you can feel free to not include that function. Now, stepping down here for a moment, we've got the config function. And in here, the most important thing is we've got a few settings, but importantly, we're turning on all the features for Rust Analyzer. And I've got a placeholder here for our DAP, our debug adapter protocol. What I'm doing there is I'm just leaving it as an empty table. And then depending on if this gets loaded, so if our code LLDB is installed, it's going to then put that onto this DAP table here under adapter. The key is adapter. And finally, and this is important here, we need to set the settings on our global Rustaceanvim. All right. Finally, just like any other plugin, we're going to return it. This will install it for us. And Lazy, if we go to the documentation over here and the installation instructions, it's going to say that this plugin is already lazy loaded. So it's handling the lazy loading under the hood. It's giving us a version recommendation. And of course here we're passing this config function that we just created. So this config, it can be a function or it can also be a table. It's up to you. In my case, I'm passing it a function because I want to grab this debug adapter and set everything up. So that's looking pretty good. Now, just before we go any further, what we want to do is just save this file. And while we're at it, we're going to go and set up our debug adapter UI. So if we open up our file tree and we go to Lua, we can see, okay, this is where we had our Rustaceanvim, and now we've got our dap-ui. If we scroll down a bit in here, we can see the nvim-dap-ui. It's just the debug adapter protocol UI, and it's pretty nice. It allows us to have a UI for a debugger, the REPL, all the information just like you'd have in VS Code available within our NeoVim session. And there's instructions on installing it. So these here are the instructions. It's got two dependencies. One is nvim-dap itself, and the other one is nvim-nio, which is part of the nvim neotest library. Okay, so this is installable as such. And now when it comes to nvim-dap, if we scroll down a little bit further, what nvim-dap is going to do for us is based on these certain hooks here. So for example, on before attaching or launch or event terminated or event exited, it's going to open or close our user interface for debugging. So it does it automatically. You don't actually need to manually invoke it. If you are debugging, it's going to automatically pop up in that debug user interface. One last thing, just while we're here, let's go to tree sitter, and I'm going to just include Rust. So obviously under our configuration, we've got auto install. So if you went to a Rust file and it wasn't yet installed with the Rust parser, it's going to automatically install it. But because I know I'm going to be using Rust, I'm just adding it there. So it's already installed. Okay, so everything's looking pretty good. Just make sure that you open and close NeoVim, and that will install those plugins that we have just set up. Now, what I'm going to do, I'm going to go to a new project. It's a Rust project, and just demonstrate what we're doing. Okay, so I'm in another project, and basically this project that I'm in is a Rust static site generator. I just created this as a site generator for my blog. I just wanted to convert markdown files into HTML. It's not the greatest piece of software ever, but it's a good place to demonstrate. We've got a few tests, and I'm going to be able to show debugging in here. But the first thing that we need to do, and you might already be a Rust developer, you've probably got this installed, but you just need to make sure that you've got Rust installed or Rustup here. So I'm going to install this. Of course, I'm going to link this in the description. Okay, so we're installing Rustup, and it's going to go ahead and we're going to just proceed with the standard installation. So I'm going to hit 1 or just enter is the default. Now you can see down here that it's installing Clippy. This is the linter for the Rust analyzer. And in a moment, we're going to see that it also has Rust format. Just make this a little bit bigger. So here we can see that Rust format was installed. Okay, so it's telling us that Rust is installed, and now we need to restart the current shell. Okay, so Rustup is installed, all right? And if we now say Rustup, then we can see that we've got this documentation. I'm on version 1.28.2. And the thing that I'm gonna do is I'm gonna set the default toolchain, okay? So I'm gonna say Rustup default stable, okay? And so it's set that to stable. So now what we can do is we can actually open our project, okay? And so we can see that we've got immediately, looks like there's one item here. We cannot find this. We've got some kind of type here, and perhaps that was a mistake by myself. All right, and now let's just check what we can do. For example, is we can run Rust and then fmt. So I've created a few X lines, and now what this is going to do, it's actually going to format the file for us. So there, it's installed that via Rustup when we were installing Rustup. We can also say, for example, do something like create some error in the code. And if we go to the diagnostic, it's going to tell us that we've got a syntax error. And of course, we can do all the normal things that we've got with our onAttached function, like hovering. Let's say if I wanted to go to any of these definitions, I can simply hit Shift K. If I go to, say, a more interesting part of the code, down here we've got a test, then I can hover on this, or I can of course go to the definition. It's going to take me to the definition. Okay, so just like we would with all the other language servers. However, now what I want to do is I want to demonstrate using the debugger. All right, so we installed code LLDB and we installed the nvim-dap-ui and its dependencies. So we've got nvim-dap available. Now, this code base here, it has a few simple tests, and all they do is just test the sanitizing of a string. So if we go to this function, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do it manually just so you can see clearly. I'm going to say dap And then in here, we've got all these different commands. And the one that I'm looking for, I'm going to toggle a breakpoint. So if you see here, we've got a B. That means that there's a breakpoint. Okay. And I'm going to do the same thing, but this time, rather than do the command manually, I'm going to say leader DB. So that is my shortcut for the breakpoint. Okay, and so we've got these two breakpoints, all right? And what I'm going to do, I'm going to go and run leader DC, and that's going to be the same as running dap continue. And here we've got a number of options, and the one that I want to do is I want to run this test sanitized string. So I'm going to hit 2, and as we can see, the debugger is now active. Okay, and just like we're in VS Code, we can step over, or we can step back, step into a function, we can step out of a function. Of course, we can use the same thing, either the commands here, so like dap, and then we could step into, for example. I've just set the shortcuts. Nevertheless, this is a super powerful tool, and Rust is obviously one of the most powerful and performant languages. So I just wanted to demonstrate what it looks like when it comes to debugging in NeoVim. And this concludes the tutorial. That was really excellent. If you've made it this far, excellent work. I'm really impressed. And you should have a really powerful environment using NeoVim and TMUX. Now, this is really just foundational. A lot of it is opinions that I've imposed onto this project. And it's not for me to tell you which plugins to use or how to use NeoVim with TMUX. The point is, I wanted to impart on you the knowledge and understanding and the patterns to apply this to your own workflow. So I'm really, really grateful for you watching this. I hope that you've learned something. Let me know if you got there in the end. Let me know if there were any parts that were more difficult than others. As usual, I'd really appreciate if you got this far, a like and a subscribe. And thank you very much for watching. If you have any ideas about any other technologies that you'd like to learn about, or any other languages that I perhaps didn't cover throughout this series, then drop me a comment below and I will endeavor to do those for you. Thanks very much, and I'll see you in the next video.